Hey everybody, what's up? It's Fabs here with another edition of the NFL Fantasy Football Podcast. Marcus is off today, so I brought in a dear friend. You may know him from Sirius XM, Fantasy Sports Radio, Football Diehards. It's Bob Harrison. Oh, by the way, this new show over on Sirius XM called Fantasy Dirt, which you may or may not heard of. Bob, how are you, my friend? Thanks for joining us.
I'm fantastic. Thanks for asking me. Anytime I can chip in and help my friends out, including Marcus, condolences to him and hope all is well there.
Yeah, exactly. So Marcus is off. He'll be back next week. Just quick thoughts. It looks like hopefully we're going to be getting back to some semblance of normalcy here, in the next few weeks. There's a lot that's been going on in our country. And again, we just want to remind everybody that, we're here to be an escape. And hopefully this country is going to be headed in the right direction after everything that we've sort of seen and gone through over the last few weeks. So before we get into the headlines, I want to bring in our faithful producer, Eddie Murphy. Eddie, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, Fabs. We were just talking off air. I think I'm making a big mistake going back home to see family in New York because out here for us in Los Angeles, I mean, all this stuff's opening up. We could dine in restaurants again and order beers and food and sit down, and it feels like old times again. Something that you thought was never going to come back is now it's all of a sudden here, and it looks like sports are slowly coming back too. So hopefully things are changing for the better.
I mean, MLB, get your act together. Like,
what is that,
bro? I'm sure both sides have reasonable arguments for playing and not playing, but the optics are bad right now. MLB,
the players are trying to meet halfway. The owners aren't. Like, right. I understand that,
right.
But at least the players are trying here. It's. I mean, as much as I want to watch the Yankees, it's like I can't blame those players. I know you feel the same way.
I mean, for me, the owners got to do right by the players. They got to do right by the fans and get this thing rolling, man. I mean, like, it seems like it's a battle between sort of like the number of games played and the amount of the contracts that are actually paid out to the players. And admittedly, I'm no expert in this. I've just been reading what I see online. And of course, a lot of times you have to take that with a grain of salt. So I just hope that they can come together. Eddie and I, diehard Yankees fans, and hell, I just miss baseball, man. I just miss
this
sports.
is baseball we're talking about.
This
right?
is baseball. See, they play this game. It's on a diamond. The guys get up to the plate with these wooden sticks called bats.
It's a horse hide thing. I'm okay murdering the pigs to play the football. The horses, I'm not okay with.
Well, anyways, we're hoping we get baseball back. Looks like basketball and hockey on the fast track back sooner rather than later. So that's a good thing. But let's get off of the baseball topic and let's do some news. First off, the big headline this week is, of course, Dalvin Cook, who has said that he will hold out without a reasonable contract offer. Now, we also saw Tom Pelissero yesterday on NFL Network basically saying that the new collective bargaining agreement makes it virtually prohibitive for a player in Dalvin Cook's position to actually carry out a holdout if he doesn't report the mandatory reporting date next month with his teammates or at any point thereafter, and does not fulfill his contract for any material period of time. And again, this is Tom Pelissero. Cook would not accrue the fourth season. He needs to become an unrestricted free agent in March. Instead, he would become a restricted free agent, which means the Vikings could basically retain him with a first-round restricted tender worth about $4 or $5 million. We've also seen reports that Cook would be happy with some deal worth $12 to $13 million per. I'm always for a young running back trying to get paid. We know that's been problematic in the NFL for at least the last decade, or if not more. So, Bob, with Cook potentially holding out, has he dropped in your rankings, and how high have you moved up Alexander Mattison, if at all?
So Cook has not moved down in my rankings. He remains at number 4. He will remain there throughout the contentious part of these negotiations. The public portion of negotiations are always the most contentious. What we heard previous to this is Dalvin Cook, excited, enthusiastic, talking about possibly 2,000 yards from scrimmage, working under Gary Kubiak. I'm all about that too. Would love to see that. Would love to see him get paid as well. But I'm just, we're very early on in the process. Seeing someone come out and plant their flag, saying they mean business is not surprising, right? So I'll kind of wait this one out and hold off. I do think if I'm drafting Cook, I may be willing to reach up a little bit on Madison. And I think anytime, any handcuff, when I feel like I have a reasonable plug and play, possibility there, I think Madison is that, assuming he stays healthy. I mean, we saw Boone last year come in and do a little bit, but I think Madison is the guy. So I would be willing to reach up for that, and that's what I'm looking for in a handcuff, plug and play threat, and an offense that's going to lean heavily on the running back either way, whoever's in the ball game. And I think that would be the case in Minnesota. So yeah, and you're in on Cook. All in on Madison at a slightly inflated price too.
Right. Yeah. You're seeing his ADP rise in best ball. He's going a little bit earlier than he had been before this news. Hopefully Dalvin and the Vikings can sort of get this thing sewn together, and we're all good for the start of the 2020 season. Next up in Atlanta, and we've heard some news out of Atlanta, right? I mean, like typically, June is kind of a slow time for NFL news, but we're hearing a lot of stuff. First off, we're going to talk about Falcons OC Dirk Cutter, who has said that he expects to see a jump in Calvin Ridley's game in 2020. Now, as a fantasy owner, I would love that. I'm a big fan of Ridley. When you look at the numbers this kid put up last year, towards the end of the season, it was about a 4-game stretch. He was one of the best wide receivers in fantasy football. That's when Austin Hooper was out. Hooper is no longer with the team now, of course, with the Cleveland Browns. So, Bob, with Cutter excited about Ridley, and fantasy owners excited about Ridley, where does he fall in your wide receiver rankings, and in what round are you targeting this talented young wide receiver?
I think for me, I would rather have him. So a lot of times what happens for me is when I see two receivers that I really like a lot, one is way more expensive. I'm hoping everyone's chasing the way more expensive guy. I think Ridley's coming off maybe as a wide receiver 2, coming off, I think on Fantasy Calculator right now, after 12 for sure. I think 14 right now. Mm-hmm. I think that's a pretty reasonable price in PPR. I don't want to overpay. And I think maybe on Julio, you are overpaying. You're counting he's wide receiver 5. You're paying up for that premium, the name. So in all these cases, almost every time where I have 2 high-end receivers, it may even extend to the Buccaneers at some point, where Godwin, I love Chris Godwin, but I'm old and mean and cheap, and I want to pay a little less, right? So I'm always looking for the discount. And I think in this case, Ridley's a reasonable discount, although I do think, the change to Hayden Hurst is going to have a little impact, especially with the way Matt Ryan's talking him up right now. We'll see. That's a guy who's going to rise an awful lot. Maybe he'll attract some attention as well.
By the way, you're not mean. You may be getting on the close to old, but you're not mean. I mean, come on, buddy. Let's say
don't sell me short.
You and you look handsome and you look tremendous. So I don't care. Age is just a number. Speaking of age is just a number, maybe in this case, that's a different story. Todd Gurley passed his Falcons physical, right? And we talk about Gurley being a 25-year-old. He's a young man, right? He's a young man, but yeah. How old are his knees? I mean, like that's sort of it. Like I remember Terrell Davis, who is a buddy of mine and a not only a Hall of Famer, but a great dude. But TD, was a young man as well, but his knees had taken a pounding, especially with all the carries and the touches that he endured during his career with the Broncos. Now, Gurley came into last season with a lot of question marks because of the knees. And went out and really was unreliable in the first half of the season. And in the second half, the Rams more or less unleashed him, and he was much more of a very viable fantasy option. Now, Gurley is healthy, at least based on what Atlanta's doctors found with the physical. Does this make you want to draft Todd Gurley a little bit higher? Right now, he's 14th or 15th off the board at the running back position, right in the middle of the top of that RB2 conversation. So where are you drafting Gurley after this news? And does this change your opinion on him one way or another?
Dirk Cutter continues to make me incredibly nervous about this. He is like downplaying the ability, the possibility, don't know what he has in the tank, I think was the quote from Cutter. And, our friend, our series colleague, Brad Evans threw out some numbers, that the metrics don't, the deep dive and the numbers don't look great for Gurley. But I look at it this way. I'm looking for the volume, right? And I'm looking for clear paths to workload. And as much as, Brian Hill had a great game last year, it wasn't that great. Quadre Allison, I'm not excited about. I think Gurley has that clear path to workload. So, look, there's a lot of guys in that price range I like an awful lot. He is among them because what are the Falcons? I mean, they have no reason to preserve him. They're all in, obviously, making a push for a championship. He's on a 1-year deal. Get what you can out of him. And I guess some of this comes down to your faith and what you believe Gurley's still capable of. And if you look down the stretch last season, I mean, it wasn't as horrible as maybe, you would have expected based on the usage early in the season. So I'm fine at this price right now.
And I mean, I don't think there's an argument, right? Like there's less competition in the backfield in Atlanta than there was at least perceived in Los Angeles last year when they brought in Darrell Henderson. Malcolm Brown obviously was still in the mix there too. So I see, and volume is king in fantasy football. And yeah, I get some of the metrics might not look great, but I mean, if he gives me 14 touchdowns, metrics be damned. And I feel like he can get into that in that area. And also keep in mind, listen, man, I mean, Atlanta's offense is going to be good. It's going to be really good. So there's going to be opportunities for Todd Gurley. Sticking with Atlanta, boy, we're talking a lot of Falcons today, but they have been in the news, right? Matt Ryan did a Zoom session earlier this week, and he talked up Hayden Hurst, who's one of my favorite late round tight ends to target. Ryan described Hurst as, quote, one of the fastest and most athletic tight ends I've ever played with. He's played with some good tight ends, man. Like, let's see. Austin Hooper was pretty good last year. Right now, there's another guy that played in Atlanta a few years back. What was his name?
Tony Gonzalez. That guy.
Gonzalez. I mean, so hell, again, it's high praise. Maybe it's motivational, but this is noteworthy because they've been working out together. Ryan and Hurst have, and Hurst is in a spot where I'm not going to say he's going to inherit all of Austin Hooper's targets, but you're looking at over 90 available targets just on Hooper's departure alone, Bob. So Hayden Hurst right now is getting drafted probably as a low tight end 1, a high tight end 2. What's his ceiling in Atlanta?
Dirk Cutter did a little of that play calling for Tony Gonzalez, heavily targeted the tight end, obviously then for the obvious reasons, but also with Hooper, we saw the numbers grow the last few seasons under Cutter. And I would expect a similar role, right? And if they have this level of faith in him, look, I like the fact that he's, working with Ryan. That's something Hooper did the last few years and certainly worked out for him. At this point, the price is starting to rise to where I'm, zagging a little bit, right? Everyone seems to be zigging his way. Most of this rise in ADP, I blame on my Football Diehards co-host, Mike Dempsey, who will draft the hell out of him. I mean, he finds his guy and he's locked in on him. And if we're drafting and drafts together early in best balls, we were driving the price up single-handedly because we're both trying to snake out from each other. But I think in this case, when you look at him right now, tight end 10, right? Jared Cook going after him. Look, I'm not big on Austin Hooper, but there's a lot of high-end talent, I think, or guys that are on the rise this year at tight end, which hasn't been the case in previous years. Seemed like kind of a morass of mediocrity, once you got outside that top tier. Now it seems like there's at least some guys that offer some encouraging promise. So we're getting to the point where I'm starting to throttle back, right? I'm just going, okay, maybe I have enough Hurst shares. I got them at a more reasonable price that people are paying now. I'll live with those and find another cheaper option.
And, we always talk about how there's value at the quarterback position late. Let's look back at last year's tight end position, okay? Darren Waller was 3rd, and he was a late round pick. Mark Andrews was 5th. He was a late round pick. Austin Hooper was 6th. He was a late round pick. Jared Cook was 7th. He was a late round pick. Tyler Higbee was 8th. He wasn't drafted. Dallas Goedert, Mike Gesicki, all in the top 12. So you can get value at this position. And if you tend to wait on tight ends, if you don't want to get, one of the elite guys or, even a Gronk at this point too, like I'd rather get Gesicki or Hayden Hurst based on where they're going to be going, as opposed to Rob Gronkowski or Austin Hooper based on where they're going to go because a little bit more name value. But there's other guys, Bob, TJ Hawkinson, Blake Jarwin. How about them Cowboys? Noah Fant, Jonnu Smith, Chris Herndon, Ian Thomas, like Jay Sternberger. The position is loaded with young talent ready to break out. So if you don't get out and grab one of the top 4 or 5 tight ends, and if you pass on a Hunter Henry, who's going to go somewhere, maybe 6th, 7th round, Evan Ingram, those guys, there's still some really good value out there. And, that might be a position where you draft 2 tight ends and you see which one pans out. Maybe they both will. And you play the upside game at that position. I think streaming
is always an option at that position as well.
No doubt. No doubt. Moving on to the great Northwest in Seattle, Carlos Hyde, new Seahawks running back, told the reporters this week that everybody knows Chris Carson is the starter. And that's not news to fantasy owners because it's pretty obvious. Chris Carson, when he was available last year, was tremendous. He was reliable. He was a strong RB2, but he is coming off of a hip injury. Rashad Penny's coming off of a knee injury, which was a late season knee injury. And from what I've read, it's a more serious ACL than maybe the everyday ACL tear, I guess. So Penny is probably going to end up on the PUP list. So knowing that Carson's going to be the starter, all things being equal, assuming he's going to be back to 100%, where are you comfortable drafting Chris Carson? And do you feel like Carlos Hyde is going to put any sort of dent into his touches in 2020?
No, because Rashad Penny, a first-round pick of the Seahawks, barely put a dent in. I mean, he had some flash games and big games, man. It just seems like Pete Carroll and Brian Schottenheimer are all in on Carson. Fumbles, whatever. They just keep rolling him out there, and he keeps getting the job done from a fantasy perspective reasonably well. I like him as a running back, too. You can maybe wait a little bit, take your chances, see if he makes it to 3. Probably won't. But a later 2 is where he's going. I love that value. He's in current best ball. He's my most-owned player.
Yeah, and I've gotten him in drafts as a flex starter, and I got that little smile on my face, like the cat that got the canary, sort of like. Speaking of cats, Bob Harris,
he averaged over 15 points a game last year, and I think that that's pretty solid for running back too. And he has that touchdown upside that we love, and they seem to be determined to run the ball even with all the talent in their passing attack.
Bro, he averaged 0.2 of a point less than Nick Chubb last year. Like, right. I mean, he's a good player, and I don't think Carlos Hyde's going to put a big dent into that touch share.
Carlos Hyde doesn't think so either.
Exactly. So that's a player that obviously we're hoping that there's no setbacks at this point. It doesn't look like that's going to be the case. Chris Carson could end up being, Chris Carson could be a very nice bargain for some fantasy owners. Now let's move on to my beloved Dallas Cowboys and CeeDee Lamb. And CeeDee was quoted recently as saying that, what is the goal of his career in the NFL? He wants to be a Hall of Famer. And I want to hear that because I'm a Cowboys fan. I'm a fantasy owner. And I'm hoping that CeeDee Lamb exceeds, at the very least, meets expectations coming out of college. Was ranked by many, including Daniel Jeremiah, as the top wide receiver in the 2020 class. Just basically could do it all. And, if he had landed on a team, say like the Raiders, for example, or the Jets, who really needed a number one, we'd be talking about this guy as a potential sleeper/breakout candidate. But because he went to Dallas, we already have Amari Cooper. Sorry, I say we. This is, over 40 years of being a fan. Chris Carson, Michael Gallup is in the mix. Blake Jarwin's in so there's a lot of mouths to feed in Dallas. And that's why I feel like his value is sort of slid a little bit. But at this point, do you see there being a scenario where CeeDee Lamb could potentially overtake, maybe not Cooper, but at least Michael Gallup as the number 2 wide receiver in Dallas as a rookie? Or are we sort of in a waiting process here, and he's going to be okay for the next couple of seasons, and then after that is his breakout?
Yeah, I think this is more of a longer-term play for me, and it's worth noting our buddy Mike Clay at ESPN put in, has his dynasty ranking. CeeDee Lamb is his number 1 wide receiver this year coming out, and that's for a reason. I mean, he's a hell of a playmaker, and I do think he's a guy that's going to develop, but I think the role has to develop. Gallup is, relatively well established. Cooper just got paid, so I think he retains his role. So we see the shiny new thing, and we tend to jump at it a little bit. And I get that. I'm not buying too heavily. Look, this is not for me the year in redraft to be chasing rookie wide receivers, right? I mean, I'm going to play safer plays, guys that are established in offenses that they're familiar with quarterbacks they've been playing with to the degree possible. And when it's not, then maybe I start taking some chances. I don't know if Lamb's even on the top of my list of redraft rookies right now.
Okay. And for me, as a Cowboys fan, I'll probably take a later on flyer on them because why not? So let's get off the Cowboys topic. Let's talk about the Giants. And Eddie, I want to get you in on here too because you are our resident New York Giants fan /expert/homer. And the Athletic's Dan Dugan is reporting that Daniel Jones is training specifically to increase his ball security. He had 18 fumbles last year, over 12 starts, and he lost 11. Those are Dave Craig kind of numbers. If you don't know who Dave Craig is, go and Google him. Okay. He was a fumble machine, and Daniel Jones was a fumble machine. Now, with that being said, he's my favorite quarterback sleeper for 2020. Eddie, trying to put the homerism aside, how high do you think Daniel Jones could finish among fantasy quarterbacks in 2020? Because every single year we see a guy move up. I mean, last year it was Lamar. The year before it was Patrick Mahomes. It happens all the time. Is Daniel Jones that guy this year?
Well, I mean, they spend 3 draft picks on offensive line, and obviously the premier one being Andrew Thomas. So that's a major help with his ball security. The second thing was they're between their running backs, their tight ends, and their receivers. None of them were all healthy at the same time last year. So you combine that with his protection now. You have everyone like Saquon, Evan Ingram, Shepard, Golden Tate, all healthy, and obviously his new favorite target is Darius Slayton. So you got to like that. And, obviously the other thing was he was a rookie last year. Now he's a sophomore. He learned the offense more. I trust Jason Garrett. I know former Cowboy, but I think he's a perfect offensive coordinator for Jones to learn more and just be comfortable. I mean, he could run, which helps in fantasy. I'm not going to be that crazy and say top 10, but I would not be surprised if he's in the upper half of the league this year.
Yeah, and I know, Bob, you're a big fan of Danny Dimes as well, right?
I am, and I'm everything you guys said. Look, it is a new offense for him, but I agree with Eddie. The Jason Garrett component helps him as well. But just a year in the league, we saw those huge games from him last year. The talent around him. I'm drafting him when we start hitting the double digits. I'm starting to, the antenna come up and the Jones lock goes on. And if I can combine him with Slayton, another player who I like, I think that's great play. And right now, I mean, I'm mostly drafting in best ball. I think that's an ideal combo for best ball. We saw some of the huge games that he had last year. He had a number of 25-plus point games. I really like him. And then one of the things that I do, and I think it's wise with him in this case, is maybe if you reach for him a little bit to secure him and believe in the upside, there are going to be quarterbacks you can get after him that are the steady Eddies, I call them, the guys that you're gonna have. Their job is secure. They're going to be moderately productive. And you can just grab one of those guys and kind of feel comfortable. And if things go south, you can make a move in the season. But I have really high hopes for Daniel Jones.
Yeah, and in that report out of The Athletic, apparently Danny Dimes reached out to Tony Romo, who remember had some ball security issues early on in his career. Now, I don't know how I feel about that, okay? Like, you're a Cowboy. We don't want to help the Giants. Like, come on, we got to play these guys twice a year. That's our big rival outside of the Redskins. The Redskins probably ain't going to be that good this year. I think the Giants, maybe could surprise some people. So regardless.
Eddie, this is why I hate all 32 teams equally.
I can't play you there.
Oh, man, sorry. Hey, man, quarterbacks, they all got to stick together, right? So we're all good. So that was the news, my friends. All right, let's move on to the next topic. And again, June is kind of a slow time for NFL news, but we have been hearing a lot of talk about certain backfields around the National Football League. And running backs are the lifeblood of fantasy football. I've been a running back truther ever since I started in this industry over 20 years ago. I've always loved running backs. I'm going to continue to always love running backs. So I want to talk about the running backs. We already talked about Seattle with Chris Carson and Carlos Hyde, but there's been other backfields in the news that we've seen some interesting headlines. So out of Baltimore, Mark Ingram was tremendous last year. Was a touchdown machine, run-based offense under Greg Roman. Lamar Jackson in the backfield, a hell of an attack. Now you've got J.K. Dobbins in there, and we've seen reports out of Baltimore that they've said all 4 running backs are going to have a role. So you're talking about Ingram, you're talking about Dobbins, Gus Edwards, and Justice Hill. I feel like if there's any kind of role for Gus Edwards or Justice Hill, it's going to be on the backside. I mean, we're talking about very small roles. But the big competition here is between Ingram and Dobbins. And Bob, I feel like Ingram is almost a lock to be the starter. But I mean, let's keep in mind, 30 years old, it doesn't have a ton of wear and tear on his body compared to some other guys of his age. But you don't bring in J.K. Dobbins and sit him on the bench. This guy is a hell of a back who I think could end up being an absolute beast, long-term dynasty league, keeper league kind of guy. So Ingram right now, and you're looking at Dobbins coming in. He's certainly affected Ingram's ADP. Where are you comfortable drafting Ingram? And do you feel like there's a scenario where Dobkins can usurp him as the starter in 2020?
Yeah, and I'm not comfortable drafting Ingram. He's going on. There are other guys in his range that I'm comfortable with. Jonathan Taylor going right before him, it would be an ideal pick. But 26 running back off the board, I think he has that capability, and I think he'll start off, as you said, as the starter. But I agree with everything you said about Dobbins. And to me, Dobbins is that guy that's going to come on late, one of those players that you're going to draft a little later who's going to maybe win you a title. And those are the kind of guys we want to draft. He's coming off fairly low. I'm surprised at how low he's still coming off right now. I think he's in the 50 range on oh no, I'm sorry, he's 34. So
34.
he's moving up. But even that, I think is a pretty reasonable play, and maybe you have to wait on him a little bit. One of the issues for a lot of these rookie running backs is going to be their ability to pass protect. I don't know if that's as big a deal in Baltimore as it is in other places, right? Because you're playing with Lamar Jackson, who last year led the team in rushing. I do think the thing about Ingram, though, he can be a viable play early on if you get him at the right price. He has a long history, as you mentioned, of sharing, going back through New Orleans. His 1,000-yard seasons have come later on, so the wear and tear is not as heavy as it would be for other 30-year-old backs. So I'm okay playing him. I just want to get him at the right price, and there's maybe some guys I like in that same range that have more upside.
Yeah, I feel like Dobbins in the right scenario could be a league winner. I really do.
Yep, totally agree.
Love his talent. Moving on, the Colts, and we've heard Frank Reich talk about Nyheim Hines and how he thinks he can catch 10 passes in a game, and then we've heard about him talking about Marlon Mack and saying that there's inherent respect for the starter returning, and then we've also heard the comments about Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack being a 1-1 punch, which is a punch to the gut of fantasy owners who love Jonathan Taylor. So do you see a scenario where this is a 50-50 split between Taylor and Mack? And maybe not 50-50 totally, because Nyheim Hines is going to obviously get some opportunities as a pass catcher out of that backfield. But are we overrating Jonathan Taylor in redrafts, and are we underrating Marlon Mack? Or is this all just coach speak and Jonathan Taylor is going to be the guy sooner rather than later?
All of those things are true. I am currently overrating him. I'm way overpaying for Jonathan Taylor. There will be a split to some degree, and Jonathan Taylor will be a great play in the end. Look, he's an ideal fit for this offense. Size, speed, power, all the things you want running behind that road grading offensive line. I love a Marlon Mack heading into a contract here. His role is going to depend on what he does with the turns he gets. But I expect a lot out of Taylor. Nyheim Hines is the wild card. We've heard Frank Reich and Nick Sirianni, the head coach and offensive coordinator, formerly with the Chargers, both of them, invoke the name Danny Woodhead, who they call a role-playing starter. And, he was a significant chunk of that offense in San Diego at the time. So that's a little more of a concern than probably it should be for me right now, just because as I think about it, I think, wow, that'd be a significant chunk. But I think in the end, Jonathan Taylor is you look at his body of work at college and you look at his speed and size, I just think he's a great fit for what the Colts want to do with that offense.
Yeah, I have seen him dropping a little bit. If you look at Fantasy Football Calculator right now, he's going in the fourth round after guys like Devin Singletary, David Montgomery, Raheem Mostert. Don't think I agree with that. I have him ranked higher than
right?
But right, because exactly. So there was that big surge after the draft, and then when you hear Reich starting to talk, and that sort of affected his ADP. And at this point, I mean, if you're doing a best ball draft, this might be a good time to go out and get Jonathan Taylor, because his value has dropped just a little bit. Moving on, another AFC South team, the Tennessee Titans. And there's not really a lot to talk about in terms of the Titans backfield. It's going to be Derrick Henry on first down, Derrick Henry on second down. But will it be Derrick Henry on third down? Okay, so Titans OC Arthur Smith has said that Henry's workload for this upcoming season depends on how games go. Hey, Arthur, you did a great job last year. Don't stop giving him the football, okay? You know what's gonna be the biggest sort of dependence on how your games go? How many times you give Derrick Henry the football. With that being said, Derrick Henry is a locked and loaded first-round pick. But do we go after Darrington Evans late in draft, Mr. Harris? Because he is almost certainly going to see a role in this offense.
Not me. I'm not. I'm going to stick with Derrick Henry. Look, Derrick Henry playing on the tag. We're talking about the guy coming off leading the league in carries, yardage, rushing touchdowns. Looking for a guy that had 650 more yards after contact than anyone else in the league, right? And down the stretches when he seems to come on and do his best working with the Titans, I think a reflection of their coach, Mike Vrabel, wants to be that smash mouth team. And plus they play the Jaguars twice a year, and he's going to score 1,000 points each in both those games. So, but no, in all seriousness, some of this talk, is a little harder for me to buy into. I think, we can look at what they had with Deion Lewis, where they had that kind of smaller, more explosive player. He just didn't see a lot of time. Maybe Evans does. He's another smaller guy, 203 pounds, not a big body. So he's quick. He's got all those kind of things, and Deion Lewis had him too.
Yep.
Deion Lewis not there anymore.
So I feel like the rookie is worth a late round flyer, and especially in this sort of coronavirus sort of world that we're living in. If you expand your rosters, and I actually talked about that on Fabs 5 on Fantasy Dirt this week, then Evans certainly is a worthwhile late round flyer, especially if you go out and get Derrick Henry in the first round. So moving on to Tampa Bay now. So when the Bucs drafted Keyshawn Vaughn, we were all, Keyshawn Vaughn, love him, sleeper running back. He's going to be great. No Peyton Barber, Ronald Jones hadn't really secured anything there in a couple of years with the Bucs. But then you hear talk about Devontae Freeman, okay? And Freeman's looking for a little more money than teams are willing to pay a guy at his age, especially considering he's coming off an injury-plagued season. We've heard Bruce Arians say, that if his price tag was reasonable, the Buccaneers might think about signing him. Does this give you any pause with the Keyshawn Vaughn hype? Because if the Buccaneers were set at running back, I feel like Arians would basically just say, no, we got our guys. We're good. We're not interested in Devonta Freeman. Instead, he said that he would consider him if the price tag was reasonable.
I have not been like chasing these guys, any Tampa Bay running backs hard. I do think your colleague Cynthia Freeland mentions, that Vaughn seems to fit what Tom Brady does best, that short passing attack. So there's maybe a little something there. And like neither him or Ronald Jones are going very high. They're 32 and 35, I think, right now. Mm-hmm. This might be another case where I'm going for the cheaper guy and Ronald Jones. I mean, we've seen Arians use multiple backs. We'll see if Devonta Freeman comes in and throws a bit of a kink into this. I think for right now, both guys are reasonably priced. I think I'll have shares of both of them if I'm probably drafting 10 times. If I'm drafting a Bucs back 10 times, probably I'm going with the cheaper ones 7 times out of the 10. Interesting.
I mean, listen, Ronald Jones saw some flashes last year. I just feel like he's been underwhelming overall in the NFL. And when, you see the Buccaneers draft another running back, is it for depth purposes and there's going to be a committee situation, much like there was last year with Peyton Barber, or did they draft Vaughn to come in and compete to be the guy? And that's the big question mark. And
Vaughn, he's been effective as a rusher and receiver. He was at Vanderbilt. You wonder about the level of competition, things like that. But I mean, he was pretty productive when they asked him to be in. Maybe is a good fit. I'm just not sold on either back. Just the Tampa Bay backfield has not been that appealing for a while, and I don't know that it changes materially this year.
Last backfield here to talk about, which has been in the news, is the Niners backfield. And, we all know, obviously, they traded away Matt Breida. So right now it looks like it's going to be the Raheem Mostert / Tevin Coleman show. Although Jerick McKinnon is still in the mix. It's sort of like out of sight, out of mind, but he actually still plays for the Niners. And whether or not he can stay healthy, that remains to be seen. So we've seen reports that Mostert has put on some more muscle in order to see more carries in that backfield. And he was tremendous in the second half of last season. I mean, down the stretch, he had some great games. He was as solid an RB2 as there was in fantasy football. And now he comes in with less competition, although, Jeff Wilson is still there as well. And I mentioned Jerick McKinnon, and clearly we're going to see Tevin Coleman in the mix too. How high are you drafting Mostert? And I mentioned he's going ahead of a guy like Jonathan Taylor right now on Fantasy Football Calculator. Or are you more interested, and I think I know the answer to this because I know Bob Harris pretty well, are you more interested in Tevin Coleman at a discounted price?
I think Coleman at a very discounted price. Okay, when you talk to the guys that cover the 49ers on a daily basis, as I did regularly last season, they were all waiting for the other shoe to fall, right? Anytime you asked them about the running back, no one felt very comfortable. I do think Mostert, pretty much solidified himself, especially in the postseason. He was just phenomenal. But remember, we're talking about a guy with 178 career carries, right? There's a reason he's been on so many teams. He's still, think about Damian Williams, a guy that was a journeyman that came into Kansas City in the right circumstances. He excelled. I think whoever's in that backfield in the right circumstance can excel. And there are going to be games where Tevin Coleman has big games as well. And you think back to Shanahan's history with him in Atlanta, sharing with Devonta Freeman, had a huge touchdown season. I think it was 2016 for the Falcons. So I think he is a capable player, more of a best ball guy for me right now. So I think that's how I divide it up. I'd still be a little more interested in Raheem Mostert in redraft leagues, but in best ball, I'm going for the cheaper option who will give me some spike games. And I think Coleman will still do that.
Yeah. Mostert, I feel like, is going to end up being the 1A in that backfield, or the one in that backfield, and Tevin Coleman will sort of be, sort of 1A as long as he can avoid injuries. But I mean, let's not get things twisted, right? I mean, Tevin Coleman had one big game last year. He had that 4 touchdown game, and then Mostert took over and was the guy.
Right, and that's the thing. When you talk to beat writers, they all down the stretch, they kept expecting the okey doke, the Shanahan okey doke, right? He's going to pull the rug out from under you as soon as you acknowledge that it's Mostert, and that's his plan, is to get opponents looking one way and then feinting the other way. And that just never materialized, mostly because Mostert was just dominant. And look, whatever the case, whatever you're counting on, it again, Mostert maybe for redraft. What do we know for sure? The 49ers are going to run and play defense. That is what got them where they went last year, and I suspect that'll be more of the same this year.
Yeah, and Kyle Shanahan, man, he has got a very, very long and successful history of running. Hell, he made Carlos Hyde a stud. You remember that? Carlos Hyde, I think, had 59 catches in Shanahan's offense in San Francisco, several years ago. I mean, like, he was, Carlos Hyde was very good. So let's move on to the final segment here. And we're talking about national days, right? So like every day of the year now has a day, right? So like earlier this week, it was World Oceans Day, and Tuesday was National Donald Duck Day. By the way, Donald Duck Day,
and National Call Your Doctor Day, National Strawberry Blueberry Pie Day. It was multiple days,
right? So today we're taping on Wednesday. Is National Iced Tea Day. Okay. I couldn't really come up with the topic for National Iced Tea Day because, tomorrow is King Kamehameha Day. I don't know. I don't even know if I said that right. Thursday also is National Corn on the Cob Day. And I was thinking maybe we talk about Randall Cobb, but what are we really going to say about Randall Cobb? You remember David Cobb? There's been a few Cobbs in the National Football League over the history. Patrick Cobbs, Reggie Cobb, but not really any fantasy stars. Then I looked at Friday. It's National Loving Day, Bob Harris. I like that. National Loving Day. So, Eddie, I want to get you in on this too. Give me a fantasy player that you are loving for 2020.
First of all, I don't know why we're just blowing past Iced Tea Day. I love Body Count, love don't hate to play, all that stuff.
How do I mix that into fantasy football though? I don't know any Iced Tea references at all. I have no idea.
All right, I think they're talking about the other Iced Tea anyway. I don't know. I'm just guessing.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's what I'm figuring.
There's a few players. I mean, I love everybody, right? But I especially love Chris Carson. We talked about him. I especially love Darius Slayton and Daniel Jones. We talked about them. So I'll talk about the guy that I haven't talked about, which is Mark Andrews. Again, I mean, I'm going to overpay for him. I do like the fact that he's going fourth, coming off mostly fourth. I'm seeing the other three, even Zach Ertz, who I don't know that he deserves to go off ahead of Mark Andrews, but I love Andrews, love his role, and I'm liking the price when I can pick him up maybe in the fourth round or even a little later. I'm locked in on him, and but behind Carson, he is my most owned player in best balls right now.
Yeah. I'm going to go with Miles Sanders. I love Miles Sanders. Everybody knows I love Miles Sanders. Like, I mean, I just love him. Sanders is in a great position to succeed. Philadelphia did not do anything in the offseason, at least not yet. Please don't sign Devontae Freeman to hurt his value. Boston Scott will be behind him, and then Corey Clement. I don't see that as a whole lot of competition for the featured role. Over the second half of last season, I believe it was the last 4 or 5 games with Jordan Howard out, he averaged over 20 fantasy points a game. He averaged over 20 touches a game. He didn't get a whole lot of hype coming out of Penn State because he played behind some guy named Saquon Barkley. But Miles Sanders is a hell of a back. He was great in his last year with the Nittany Lions. Last year, he showed flashes of potential. The Eagles' offense should be pretty explosive. Let's put it that way. So I have Miles Sanders ranked in the top 10 among running backs. And I can absolutely see Miles Sanders being drafted at the end of the first round, even in 10-team leagues. I really think that he is this year's big-time breakout running back. So in honor of National Loving Day, I'm going to put my love out there for Miles Sanders. Eddie, how about you? And no Giants, okay? No Giants.
I won't
Give me somebody that you love in fantasy, a guy that you want on all your teams.
I can even give you
Give me
two,
two,
but
brother.
the main one is a guy that I was ahead of the curve of last year, and he's a friend of our
I
show, is
love
Austin
Austin.
Eckler.
Yeah.
I think even with the quarterback questions, I'm a bigger fan of Justin Herbert than most, but I also do think that if Tyrod Taylor does play the full season, I think he can get the job done. They have enough weapons too, especially at receiver and tight end, that it won't be defenses ganging up just on Austin Eckler, but he could do it all. So I love Austin Eckler. And the other, this is more maybe which player do you love going into 2021, but we will see flashes this season. And if Big Ben is fully healthy, the elbow is fine. Them getting Chase Claypool, he's 6'4", 240 pounds, and this may be my Notre Dame bias speaking, but the guy is a tight end body with the wide receiver athleticism. He can go up and get it. His combine numbers were ridiculous. I think any quarterback can fall in love with a guy that size, and I think Big Ben will. And
Big Ben, he's what, the 15th quarterback off the board on average right now in Fantasy Football Calculator. It's all about the health. There's no question that if Roethlisberger plays 14 games minimum, he's going to sling the guy is averaged right around 38 pass attempts per game over his last 2 or 3 seasons. They're going to throw the ball, and when you bring in Juju coming back with Big Ben, and you've got Deontay Johnson, who everybody in fantasy loves, and you've got Eric Ebron, who they brought in, and Chase Claypool as well. Don't forget about James Washington. That offense got a little something going on there, Eddie. So would you be confident enough to make Big Ben your number 1 quarterback? Or would he be a guy that you'd be drafting obviously late as your QB2 who could eventually be your QB1? How bold are you on Big Ben?
If it's a 12-team league and my team is pretty stacked outside of quarterback, I think I'd feel pretty good with Big Ben. It's just the one thing, maybe this is Dave Damashek getting in my head, but
where's Damashek? We're talking Steelers, man.
Right, but the Steelers not talking about Big Ben's health for a long period of time did make me think like, oh, maybe his elbow actually is pretty screwed up. And I know that he's come out with some workout videos and pictures of him doing stuff, which I don't know what that really shows. But if it is health, like you said, he will be slinging the ball. So I think if they do clear him to play, it'd be dumb not to, because they do have weapons and he could extend plays, and the offensive line is great. So I do like the Steelers as a team this year, but they only go as far as Big Ben. So, but I do feel confident that Ben, he wouldn't be playing this year, I think, if it was that serious. That's just my instinct.
And I'm sure Big Ben wants to come back.
Another great basketball play too, because he plays half his games at home and he's really good there. It turns out. But you're looking for those big spike games. He's a guy that delivers those in spikes every year.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, guys, let's wrap this thing up. Bob Harris, tremendous as always. I mean, I always say the hardest working man in fantasy football. One of the best guys you'll ever meet. He loves metal. By the way, we interviewed Tommy Lee on Fantasy Dirt this week, so you can check that out. He was awesome. I was trying not to fanboy. I love Tommy Lee. I love him. So check that out. Thank you for joining us. I had the Motley Crue shirt on and everything. Anyways, thanks for joining us, pal. Great as always. Thanks, Eddie. Great job as always, my friend. Love hearing your takes, especially on the New York Football Giants. Let's hope baseball comes back soon. Everybody out there, be safe, love one another, make every day the best day you possibly can make it. And Marcus will be back next week. We will see you then. Until then, everybody be safe.